A number of years ago, in my 20s, I traveled to Poland a number of times with a dear friend, Joel. And Joel and I were collaborating with the National Theater in Poland, which was based in Krakow, to turn the book and film, the movie Birdie, into a stage play in Polish. Well, on our first trip to Krakow, Joel and I made the decision to leave Krakow and take a short train ride. Joel was the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, and he and I decided to make the difficult journey, a short train journey, over to Auschwitz, where Auschwitz concentration camp stood. And I remember the ride, and I remember getting there and going through that gate and going into the museum of Auschwitz and not really being so touched by what I saw there. It felt like a museum rather than an experience that I expected. But when we walked outside, we walked into and through the barracks where people were sleeping or had slept on wooden shelves like some kind of stock that you might keep. We walked outside. I remember flower beds and patches of grass. We walked to the left, as I remember, toward the gas chamber and the crematorium at Auschwitz. And we walked into that gas chamber, and again, it was a surreal experience. It was something that we couldn't really comprehend even standing there. And to the gnarled and rusted piece of metal that was once a crematorium, and as we looked at that gnarl, that piece of metal, that piece of rust, essentially, we wondered what its life was when it was in full steam living out its heinous purpose those years before we were alive. And you might think that this sermon and this story are going to be about Auschwitz, Nazis, and concentration camp, but they're not. They're about something else much perhaps more present for us today. Joel and I looked past the crematorium, and we saw a chain link fence, which was the border of the concentration camp. And I hate to even use the word camp because it reminds all of us of wonderful memories and wonderful places, but that's the word that we have. And we looked in the direction past the crematorium and the gas chambers at a chain link fence that divided Auschwitz concentration camp from a private home with a garden, with laundry hanging on the line, and I remember so vividly, with a child's large rubber ball in the back garden. To this day, I can tell you that it was not only inconceivable as it is to you to imagine that, but how can we even comprehend that? I imagine that a family at some point, a young family, because of the children or child and the ball, found the house and maybe had their first tour of the house and were aware of its neighboring fence and what was beyond it. And then they looked at rooms, and then they signed papers, and then one day they made a decision to live there and where to put the sofa and the lamp and the bookcase and where their child or children would sleep and what the views would be from their windows. And I imagine even in those days that they didn't smile on the view from their windows as I do smile on the view from my windows, mountains and trees, but that they were looking at Auschwitz. But something happened. Something inevitably, absolutely happened after that first encounter with that house and its landscape and its neighboring concentration camp. Auschwitz, I believe, must have gradually disappeared from view, because how else could you live there? Auschwitz must have been like an illusionist's great trick. It must have magically disappeared, even though it was right in front of their open eyes, just as so many things disappear from our open eyes. I think about the ball in that yard. Now, when I was a child, we always played with those rubber balls or basketballs or footballs, whatever it was that we had. And inevitably, what happened was that ball would go over the fence, and we'd look and think, and we knew that we had to go around or ask our parents to go around and knock on the neighbor's door and go in the backyard to retrieve our ball. But what about those children going into their so-called neighbor's backyard and it being Auschwitz? You see, what I want to talk about tonight, Yom Kippur, is a kind of blindness. It's gradual in onset, and it's not about our vision, but it's about our moral vision. It's about our reality, what we see and what we don't see, and why we might not see what is right before us, why good people like you, like me, might actually not see what's right in front of our open eyes. The rabbis say that we have a dark and a light part of our eyes. Well, we know that, but what they say is that we can only see through the darkness, through that dark part. Now, you and I might nod our heads at that thought. Yes, it's in those darker moments of our lives that we've seen ourselves and who we are, that we've seen our reality and what it is. But I wonder if we stop looking away from that darkness, because after all, who can keep their eyes on darkness for so long? What did the Beatles say? I read the news today. Oh boy. I read the news today. Oh boy, each and every day, but I can't stay there. I can't lock my eyes on all of that darkness for the day because I can't make it through my day. Because either the story doesn't relate to me, it's too far from me, it isn't my story, it isn't the story I want to hear, or I simply can't keep myself in that state of discomfort for longer than an article's length. We no longer even read newspapers. We tend to read articles, one story, one small bit at a time. And maybe that's all that we've learned that we can take in and digest is little bits, little bites. But the world demands something else. It demands a certain consistency in our vision and in our action. During this time of COVID, you and I might have seen parts of ourselves that we once saw, but that we'd become blind to. It may be parts of us that years ago would have appalled us even, or shamed us, or embarrassed us in front of the other people in our lives, or even in front of our own mirror. But over time, we've learned to look away or to look at ourselves without seeing those aspects of ourselves, or without seeing those aspects of each other. But now we have more time perhaps, and now perhaps we have more silence, and we're forced to see in a way that we didn't see before. And we're forced to see and we're forced to hear the questions that what we see asks of us. Perhaps it's a question that says, when will you address your addiction? When will you address your negativity, your impulsiveness, your impatience? When will you address the absence of spirituality from your life? When will you address yourself in every relationship that you're in? The rabbis say, wisely, a beautiful mystical teaching, that says that a child, when she is born, knows the entire Torah. Think about that idea. Before she's born, she knows the entire Torah, the scrolls behind me. That is in her body of knowledge. But that as soon as she comes into the world with first sight and first breath, she forgets everything that she once knew. It's like waking up from a dream and saying, I knew something, but I don't know it now. And then she has the imperative to learn and to learn and to learn, just as you and I can go from moral clarity to moral blindness, but then we have the imperative to go to moral vision and then away from moral stasis to moral action. The world demands that of us. The world demands that of us. The world demands that you and I don't just close our eyes and close our doors to what's happening out there, no matter how busy we are. You see, we are busy. We've had the excuse. Ask somebody in modern day America or anywhere in the world, and I know people are watching from different countries in Europe as well, in any language, what's the answer to most instances of being asked, how are you? Busy, 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 busy. So busy in retirement, so busy in work, so busy if we're school kids. But maybe now with more silence and more time, we can rid ourselves of that excuse and say, what is it actually that I stand for? What is it that I'm willing to uncover? What is it that I once saw that I looked away from because I couldn't hold my eye to that darkness and not that light? It's not the sun that will blind us, it's darkness. It's because we can't look at it for that long. Think about that child who comes into this world knowing and then not knowing. That's all of us in our lives. We know what is going on with us and around us and in that world around us, but we make the decision to look away because it just seems impossible, or at least uncomfortable, to stay there and to stand there and to stare there. What happens with King David? King David wails. He cries to God so often, by the way. King David cries out to God a lot in the Bible. Read the book of Psalms. And what does he cry for? He says to God, when will you arise for me against my assailants? And God's answer is, David, my son, I will not arise for you until you see the verb, until you see and act on what you see, until you see the poor and the oppressed in your society. God's asking for that, for vision, for clarity, and then for action. The rabbis in their commentaries on that text say it isn't that God will be on the behalf of David because he's the king and the king of Israel, no less. It's that God says God won't be on your side until you're on the side of God. That's looking out at the world and saying, what is it that I must do? It's being a descendant of that conversation, of having that as your moral heritage. If we take ourselves seriously, then the word mandate is a mandate. And our mandate is, according to Isaiah, that we should be the light bearers in the world. That instead of heading away from darkness with our lantern, we should direct ourselves toward it and keep walking, even when it gets difficult, even when the road gets painful. You and I know that one of the clarifiers that may have happened to all of us, certainly in terms of our comfort and discomfort, was in terms of George Floyd, the lives of black people in America, social justice, all these words that right now are creating a reaction in you. And maybe you're saying, oh no, he's going to get political. I promise you I'm not. That's not what I am. That's not what I do or my obligation to you. But my obligation was and is always to represent that, a heritage of wisdom that says it is wise and moral to see and to act on what we see in ways that are judicious, that are smart, that are efficient, that create goodness. And you and I will have all different prescriptions for that. And that's not really my argument or my point or my sermon. But it's to say that all of us were made uncomfortable. Now, I'll tell you that I was raised with a good doctrine of not seeing. Not seeing in the form of colorblindness. And what colorblindness meant was that I was raised from an era and from parents and grandparents, and a society said, look at the person and look at the individual, and I see you nodding as well, and don't look at the color of their skin. And I know that to be true, and I know that to be just and good, but I also know that it has a flaw. The flaw is that I'm not looking at them anymore, and I'm not looking directly at the condition of their lives. I'm not looking at some people who are living the dream in this country and others that aren't. And I'm not living to my ethos. I'm not living to my obligation to realize the equality of every human being in this world. That's what Genesis gave us. Genesis gave us Adam and Eve, and the rabbis say, why just two parents? Why not like gazelle and sheep and llamas, whatever it was in Eden? Give us a plethora of them, but instead we just have one person and then two. And the idea was that none of us would see ourselves as being greater than another, that we are all inherently of the same family and equal, just coming from different parts of this globe, maybe with different last names, maybe even with different languages, but all having the obligation to reach out and to lift each other up. I talked about that on Rosh Hashanah, what it is to come to the aid of a mourner and to say at the end of Shiva, don't get up on your own. I need, for me and for you and the world that's watching, I need to reach my hands out to you in your low stool and to lift you up, to pick you up, and to make a journey with you. That's perhaps the call of today, to lift one another up, to make a journey together toward a better world that will make us proud. Perhaps it's being willing to know that one day we will stand before God, before our children and our grandchildren, and ask ourselves, will we be able to say, I did not look away. I did not blind myself. I acted on what I saw. And I took myself seriously. I took the other in my life seriously. I took my own country and my society seriously, our America, and made the difference in my own small way. I lived up to my morality and my ethics and the best in myself. When that child comes into the world, what does she know of this world? Initially, it's small beauties. And then after a while, she starts to see herself in it. And if her parents are wise, not only smart, they're teaching her her own agency, what she might do and what she must do. And when she comes to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or some kind of philosophical organization that organizes her thoughts toward goodness, then perhaps she realizes that her eyes matter. What she sees matters. We have two eyes. I've said that many times. We know for the most part we have two eyes. One of them must be looking out at the world and saying, what is it that is broken that I can fix, that I can contribute to its wholeness? And the other equally must look not only at the beauty and the ugliness that is out there in our world, but that eye, I would say, must be directed inward to look at ourselves, to say, what is it within that is beautiful, that must be preserved, and that is, even if I dare say it, ugly, that I must vanquish, that I must diminish and minimize in this year ahead. We come to words in our text, and today we're coming to words in our text, Isaiah 58. And the big question is, do they matter and do they mean anything, or are they just empty words in prayer books? And here we come to a text. The prophet Isaiah speaks of you and of me today on this day that began at sunset and ends at sunset. And Isaiah asks us to question our motives for what we do religiously and to ask ourselves if it's playing out in the world that needs us, not only in a sanctuary. God's words from Isaiah are, "Is such the fast that I desire, a day for men and women to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast? A day when the Lord is favorable? No, this is the fast that I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. And when you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to ignore your own human kin." To these beautiful, wise words, this call of this holy day, I just add these simple words. May God bless you. May God bless this nation. May this holy day bring holiness not into 24 hours, but into the year to come. Amen. Gmar Chatima Tova. May you be not only written into this book of life, but inscribed in it.